Welcome. We are here to discuss bills of rights, which are among the most important protections for our liberties against power-hungry governments, and we know that governments have no shortage of desire to usurp power, including power that they're not supposed to have. So, debates about whether bills of rights are necessary have occurred since the American founding, and actually the Bill of Rights was a fundamental point of contention between the Federalists, who wanted a constitution without the Bill of Rights, and the Anti-Federalists, who resisted the Constitution unless it would have at least a Bill of Rights. And I would contend that a Bill of Rights was indeed necessary. I will give certain economic reasons for why this is the case, and I will also refute some claims made by Alexander Hamilton, among others, why a Bill of Rights would be unnecessary. So, what does a Bill of Rights do? In short, it enumerates a set of areas that are off limits to the government. For instance, free speech by individuals, freedom of religion by individuals, or a Bill of Rights could stipulate certain kinds of positive rights of due process when individuals come into contact with the government. Say, if the government puts you on trial, you are entitled to be tried by a jury of your peers. You're entitled to a speedy, impartial trial. You're entitled to be free from cruel and unusual punishment during the time of your trial. So both these procedural positive protections and these negative protections, these protected spheres of individual activity, are encompassed by a Bill of Rights. So a Bill of Rights is just one component in securing liberty. It is necessary, but it is not sufficient. That is to say, if there was nothing besides a Bill of Rights, somebody could take out a gun and say, I don't really care what's written on this piece of paper, I'm going to oppress you anyway. And these words, they don't matter to me one bit. So a Bill of Rights is a parchment barrier, and some might argue that because it's a parchment barrier, it's not particularly effective. Well, I would take a different position. I would say, obviously, a Bill of Rights requires supplements through certain checks and balances within the Constitution, through certain structural constraints on the government. But within that framework, a Bill of Rights is a necessary component. And really, that parchment barrier can be an effective defense for individual liberty. James Madison has some very interesting words on that matter. He writes, "It may be thought all paper barriers against the power of the community are too weak to be worthy of attention. I am sensible they are not so strong as to satisfy gentlemen of every description who have seen and examined thoroughly the texture of such a defense. Yet, as they have a tendency to impress some degree of respect for them, to establish the public opinion in their favor, and rouse the attention of the whole community, it may be one mean to control the majority from those acts to which they might be otherwise inclined." So Madison admits that if there are sufficiently power-hungry would-be usurpers, they might not care personally about the Bill of Rights and what it says, and they wouldn't mind trampling on a few liberties. But the fact that a preponderance of the population has access to a Bill of Rights and might be convinced by it serves as a powerful deterrent. They would say, not only do I care about the Bill of Rights, but do all these other people who are going to perceive my usurpation care about the Bill of Rights? If they have a document that says I'm not allowed to do this, then when they perceive me doing this, they'll be more likely to resist, and their resistance is more likely to be organized. And moreover, if enough of the people believe in the protections embodied in the Bill of Rights, then the threat of majority tyranny is less, because you're less likely to have a majority that will violate individual rights. And that, as we will later see, is a very serious threat. So, Madison's argument is one defense of a Bill of Rights. Another one comes to us from the economist Friedrich Hayek, who is famous for his study of dispersed knowledge within the economy. And Hayek applied it primarily to tangible goods and services. The fact is, there are millions of highly scattered particular pieces of data in the economy, and no one mind can aggregate all of that data together. Separate individuals know more about their particular circumstances of time and place than any central planner can. And this information can be coordinated through certain institutional mechanisms. With regard to tangible goods and services, it's the price system. Prices collect all of this data, incorporate it into themselves, and act as very convenient signals for individuals who don't know the source of that data, but can nonetheless derive conclusions about how much they should buy or sell, or what they should buy or sell. And these are very important signals. Likewise, I would argue, information about rights is dispersed throughout the economy. And it may be that no single individual has a clear picture of what the inalienable rights of man as against the government are. That is to say, one person might say people have a right to X but not to Y. Another person might say people have a right to Y but not to X. And they both might be partially right. They might say, well, this person is right in saying that there's a right to X, that person is right in saying there's a right to Y. If these people acted in an uncoordinated manner, they would only offer half-hearted resistance to a government that tried to infringe on both X and Y. On the other hand, if you had a document enumerating a right to X and a right to Y, then they could say, look, we respect this document, it at least partially coincides with our understanding, and we know the government is trampling on something we value. And I think it's very important to, when it comes to individual rights, have as little dispute as possible. Patrick Henry, who was a prominent supporter of the Bill of Rights, a prominent anti-federalist, wrote, "A Bill of Rights, even if its necessity be doubtful, excludes the possibility of dispute. And with great submission, I think the best way is to have no dispute." Because if there's a dispute, that can be exploited by power-hungry would-be usurpers, who could say, well, sure, some people think there's a right to X, some people think there's a right to Y, but there are informed differences of opinion. Look, this person disagrees, and this person disagrees, and who's to say that this person's opinion is worse than the opinion of those who believe in these rights? Unless there's some kind of more formal structure binding government officials to agree to support the rights, or at least granting the position that these rights exist greater legitimacy than the position that they don't, then these demagogues could easily spin an argument along the lines of, well, let's agree to disagree about the rights, and I'll do my own thing and I'll violate them while you can still believe that they exist. So let's also consider what these would-be usurpers are faced with a Bill of Rights. Now there's a kind of rallying point for friends of liberty. Even if they might disagree on some peripheral issues, they would say, look, some things I value here are enumerated. And because they're enumerated, they're entitled to special protection, and I can easily share this document with other people. They can read it, it's very short, or at least comparatively short, it's fairly accessible to them, and they can agree with some other parts of this document, so we can launch a kind of resistance against this effort that we wouldn't have been able to in isolation, especially if each one of us had to form his own arguments from scratch. Most people are not moral philosophers. Most people do not have the intellectual training required to essentially argue from first principles for particular rights. But of course, that doesn't imply that they don't deserve to have these rights. Obviously, if you required everybody to be a moral philosopher and understand the full meaning and implication of individual rights, then we would still be living in a primitive society, because obviously there aren't enough of these people to resist all the thugs and barbarians and savages that want to take our rights away.